One of the main things I learned from this project: sometimes the little discoveries you make along the way of the creative process are some of the best parts. Even in a 13-minute short creature feature I thought I'd planned as thoroughly as possible, it turns out chaos has great taste. As a heads up, this behind-the-scenes video relentlessly spoils my short film exactly as they are, so if you haven't had a chance to see it, now's your chance. I'll be patient. It tells the story of a bicycle messenger with an unusual delivery to make. The story and tone were inspired by some of my favorites, from 80s creature features like Gremlins and The Fly to David Lynch, and some of the thoughtful weirdness that rubbed off on me reading stories by Jorge Luis Borges. In this video, I'm going to give you an inside look at what went into making the project, and I'll try not to sugarcoat anything. I learn the most when I hear from filmmakers who talk about not only what went well, but also what they would do differently in the future. From the onset of developing the concept for this film, I knew I wanted to combine two of my favorite things, which are resonant character drama and creepy little practical effects monsters. I wrote a short film script that, for the first time in a while for me, felt like the scope and the scale were something that I could actually achieve. And after that, I drew this quick sketch of the creature that I had in my head, which ended up being pretty close to the final design, but more about that later. As the story came together, I started to think strategically, because when you're making a film on a budget, you really have to think about what are the resources I have available to me that I can leverage to make something that's as impressive as possible without spending your entire retirement savings. A couple years earlier, I had looked at this fully decked out 1970s house for a commercial that I was shooting, and we did not end up using it for the commercial, but it always stuck in my head. And so when I came to this film, I knew I wanted a location that was visually rich, that was already camera ready. Because if there's one thing I've learned about filming interiors, it's that nothing cheapens the aesthetic of the production faster than having blank white walls everywhere. And as a consequence of that, I ended up rewriting the script for this location, and in the process we found that that kind of enriched the relationship between Ava and her mother. With the changes to adapt it to this location, Mom became a widow to a much older man, and we gained from that this more layered character dynamic that was a win-win creatively speaking. I wrote the script in a couple of days, but then I spent the next 6 months second-guessing myself, poking at it, kind of giving myself excuses of why I needed more time before I could really move into production. As with a lot of projects I had tried to get off the ground, as a working adult there's a lot more to juggle than when I was younger making Lego movies all the time. But I always think back to something that animation director Jay Silver said to me when we were shooting the Bricks in Motion documentary a few years back.
I've been trying to make a pirate movie for a long time. When I was in the planning stages, I thought, okay, well, let me take a realistic look at this. And I worked it out, and it was going to take me something like 8 years to have finally finished the movie that I was attempting to make. And for me, that was a very daunting figure, and so I never even started it. But it occurred to me one day, if I had started that, even though it was going to take me 8 years, if I had started it, I would have been done a couple of years ago already. But then I think, well, then you should start now. And then you won't be having this conversation with yourself again in 10 years. But I didn't, because I think, but that's 8 years away.
So it was time to take the plunge. Casting was probably the area where I had the least real-world experience going into this. I'd cast a lot of commercials, often based on headshots, but for this film we needed dialogue-driven scenes where casting people who really fit these characters well was going to be important. And due to practical and budget considerations, most of that casting process took place online. A little bit of a challenge to do that on the Zoom call, but we made it work. Thankfully, I was also able to find some actors through my existing network. Another interesting element of the pre-production process was designing Ava's tattoos. This involved a lot of conversation back and forth with our hair and makeup artist, Blythe Tierney Dever, as well as the actress playing Ava, China Walker. But it was a really fun process of discovery, kind of designing some of the custom pieces as well as using stock artwork for others. And this is a picture of the water bottles that I purchased for the film. I did some math and figured out that this was the minimum we needed just to get through production. Of course, it is a disgusting amount of single-use plastic, and I think these are the kind of things that I just hadn't really thought about for a production this scale before. So it's certainly something I'm going to be thinking about how I can do more efficiently next time. But believe it or not, we actually ran out of water on the last day and had to get a few more, so these things add up when you're thinking about cast and crew of a decent size. Finally, it was time to roll cameras. The first order of business was shooting some background plates. Like any throwback genre film, we were using some techniques you don't see every day. So we shot rear projection footage to play in the background, so that we could later film the bicycle scenes in front of a projector. That gave us a lot of control for the close-ups while giving us this kind of dreamy, stylized feel that I wanted the film to have anyway. Not to mention it was a whole lot safer than trying to shoot those things on an open street. Next came principal photography. That's the big one. Because the entire film takes place at night, we did have one day in the studio, but then we shot the rest over 3 consecutive nights, complete with 3 a.m. lunch breaks. But our long-suffering cast and crew made it, I won't say a breeze, but it was certainly a blast. Obviously, this is the aspect of production where you could go into endless detail about what went well and what didn't. Our first AD, Anthony Milton, as well as our second AD, Dan Beard, and the film department at Baylor Film and Digital Media were a huge help here. They even provided studio space for us to shoot the effects-oriented parts of the film and the rear projection. Now, here's the biggest lesson that I had during the main part of filming. Coming from commercial directing, I was used to shooting tons of quick, individually simple setups in the course of a day. And so what I didn't fully clock was how long it was going to take to shoot these complex, emotionally grounded performance-based scenes. And so in my plan, I had this vast shot list that was more like what I would have done on one of my commercial projects. But I quickly realized that getting every shot on my list just wasn't going to be feasible while also making things, good. We ended up finding creative ways to consolidate the shot list, either on the filming day or between nights of filming, frantically scrambling to see what I could cut without losing anything important. So next time, I'm going to think much more strategically about shot count. Being economical with the number of setups doesn't necessarily mean that you have to resort to shooting bland, wide, medium, close coverage, but it does mean that you have to be really tactical about what you're going to use in the edit, and what is going to serve the characters and the scene effectively without overcomplicating things. It's really rewired how I think about filming a scene, and I really notice it when low-budget film and television projects do it well now. Our producer Ben Davis and our cinematographer Aaron Youngblood were also a huge help in figuring out how to consolidate this without compromising. But back to this bad boy. 5 spindly legs, different, translucent, completely separate body parts should be pretty easy, right? In making a low-budget film, I now see that it is important to find that sweet spot of what you can do well without expending a vast amount of time and resources to do it that don't necessarily translate into a visibly superior end product. This creature, designed in a very chicken-scratch fashion by me, had to be built into a physical stop-motion puppet by the talented Nathan Wells, and there were several aspects of his design that kind of worked against that approach. Now, he did pull it off, but we could have prioritized more important things and put less sweat and tears into this one part of the film if I'd thought about practical execution at the design stage. For example, it could have had a wider range of motion, and if the materials hadn't been translucent, there would have been more opportunities for armature that didn't have to be very carefully hidden inside of a see-through torso. So it was kind of like we were working with one hand tied behind our backs. On the fun side, Nathan made a literal jello mold for a scene where part of the creature is cut off. But this is also the part of the project where we had the biggest happy surprises. Nathan and I had the pleasure of working with stop-motion extraordinaire Zach Macias on the animated portions of this film, and he nailed the animation of the main creature at 24 frames per second, no less. But what really surprised us in a wonderful way was these shots of the sliver wriggling around on the spoon. It's an example to me of how less can truly be more in independent filmmaking. Zach brought it to life with this eerie, twitchy precision that ended up being our favorite piece of creature animation in the film. It was basically just a slice of silicone with a wire through it that we had left over from one of the test molds, but Zach made it into much more. Minimal complexity, maximum impact. A+ spoon vibes, thank you, Zach. Similarly, for this quick glimpse of all these creatures in the caretaker's home at the end, Nathan built this entire lineup of simpler creature puppets. They looked great, and they were a surprising pleasure to work with. We felt like some of them could have held up to a lot more screen time than they got, so it's a direction I'd like to explore further, and probably will. After that came the rest of post-production, though full disclosure, I'm jumping around in the timeline here for the sake of clarity. I edited most of the film before we shot the creature footage so that we would know exactly which snippets we needed to animate. I edited the film myself, which was really a budget-driven decision. I do love working with talented editors because they will bring something to the project that I won't see myself sometimes in the footage. But I was working with budget constraints, so where I could, I took the reins myself, in this case, a lot of the post-production. Thankfully, editing went quickly because I had a pretty clear sense of how this was meant to fit together. While I was editing the delivery montage, I did find myself wishing that we had more shots of restaurant signage. So I ended up designing a few digitally, and I happened to have a trip to New York City around that time, so I shot a few extra plates in Chinatown as well. Aaron, our cinematographer, handled the color grading, and I composed the music. Through a service called AirGigs, I found the talented Nerio Almadio, who performed and recorded a cello melody I had composed for a key point near the end of the film. Once the film was complete, we submitted to festivals. Good news is we got into some we were really hoping for, like Tallgrass Film Festival and FilmQuest. And the bad news is that this all happened just in time for the peak of the 2020 pandemic. Festivals ground to a halt, or they were held as online events only. Eventually, after some delays, we were able to have a rewarding festival experience. The film was nominated for multiple cinematography awards, even winning one at the Deep in the Heart Film Festival. I would say that the timing of everything did affect my plans and expectations for the release of the project, but at the same time, it's pretty clear that I did not have a cohesive strategy going into this. I didn't want to just toss it up on Vimeo for 10 people to see it, but I also didn't have a clear alternative in mind. I think the lesson learned for me here is that you can't completely exhaust the ability of yourself and your team to work on the film. At the point that you finish the film itself, you also need to plan ahead for what happens after the film is done, because it only makes sense to leverage all the hard work that you and your team have put in. And in order to do that, there's still a long road ahead after the film is finished. So, after a few chaotic years, I'm finally here to share the project properly, and to celebrate the hard work that the cast and crew put into it. So many people helped along the way, and I'm very grateful for that. You can see the full film at the link in the description, and I hope you will if you haven't already. I look forward to keeping you all updated as I begin to share more of my work, old and new, and start the process of developing my next film. Thanks for watching.